what is the true story behind it? Just because we are told something, does it mean that it is true? Just because we are shown something, it doesn't mean that it is true. And even if it is true, is it true for me? Is it consistent with my experience? Because this is where I started. It wasn't an intellectual quest at the beginning. It was just a sense that this is not consistent with my own experience.
You are now listening to the Highlight Reel Builder for Authors, the Going North podcast. I'm your host, certified self-leadership trainer and author of the best-selling book, Stay the Course, Dom Brightmon. And you're going to be getting some goodies today from the guest that's up next. Today's episode is sponsored by the GoingNorthPodcast.com shop. And if you head over to the wonderful website, cop some merchandise, take a selfie with you rocking the gear, shoot it to yours truly, the host, Dom Brightmon at gmail.com, and I will give you a shout out on the show as well, and heck, even tag you on social media as well. So feel free to check out some of the good old merch on GoingNorthPodcastShop.com. Now let's get on with some super special, awesome content. And today on the Highlight Reel Builder for Authors, known as GNP, the Great, Glorious, and Glamorous, is the Going North podcast. And we got another super special, awesome guest that could probably fit all three of those G's and more, because we got a wonderful award-winning author, folks, who's not only a wonderful award-winning author, but also a scholar and a spiritual detective, y'all. So that's right indeed. So Columbo, but probably a couple inches shorter, but way hotter. And she's also on the editorial board of the International Journal of Goddess Studies. So that's right, folks. Goddess swag is in the building. So you know what that means, folks. That's right. Jack has to step out the way yet again, because Jill is in the building, babe, with the Jill of all spiritual trades. Let's give it up for the one, the only, the lovely doctor herself, the joyful and kind Dr. Joanna Kujawa. How you doing today, Dr. Joanna?
Hi, Dom. I'm doing great. Happy to be here with you.
Oh, that's right. Happy to have a goddess in the building, baby. That's right, indeed. That's right, indeed. That's right, indeed. Deep spiritual studies on a level that most folks don't even consider or think about. But I hear you didn't always have this level of knowledge and deep study. I hear you loved books as a kid, but you didn't get to this point. So mind telling us a bit more about the wonderful Dr. Joanna, about the times before you became an official doctor?
An official doctor. Okay, so I don't know where to start, actually. So I think that people can perhaps wonder about my accent, because at the moment I live in Brisbane, Australia, and I got my degrees from the University of Toronto in Canada, of course, but I was born in Poland. So that's my accent probably, right? So I was born in Poland, and it was interesting place to be born, especially at the time when I was born, because it was both intensely Catholic, and which is good and not so good sometimes. And also it was a communist times as well, right? So it was in a way very restrictive environment for me. But right from the beginning, because you may wonder how I started to write about goddesses, although it was not a conscious process, I was exposed to the images of a divine feminine, because in the Catholic Church, the main deity, especially in Poland, was Virgin Mary, right? So I always had a representation of a goddess, and I never questioned it. So for me, the divine was never just masculine. It was also feminine in a very powerful, sweet, and beautiful way, because, we were going to these beautiful churches, old churches in Europe, and I had this divine feminine always in front of me. Yet I also noticed that there was this image of another goddess, and I call her goddess now, although I probably wouldn't then, of Mary Magdalene, right? And then Mary Magdalene, it always puzzled me, because for some reason I found her very interesting even then, although I didn't know nothing about the Gnostic Gospels or, who she really was and so on. But it looked like she was very close to Jesus, but in the same way, she was kind of naughty. What's going on? There was this story about the prostitute that I don't believe anymore and so on. But that was the main difference that I noticed between the one, what I call archetype, Virgin Mary, and Mary Magdalene, that one was somehow associated with sexuality when the other one was completely desexualized, right? So that's why eventually, as I progressed on my spiritual journey and moved on also to Hinduism and Tantra and so on, I started to ask questions about spirituality and sexuality, which I try to answer, in this book that we are talking about. We have a goddess, right? So is spirituality and sexuality possible? Can what I call erotic rapture leads to spiritual awakening and so on. And I look into my own experiences, but also experiences of other people, but also into some spiritual traditions which exist in every possible religion, but they're kind of pushed to the side, like almost like somebody doesn't want us to know about this wonderful possibility, right? I am a little bit, we're chatting before the show, so I can say, yes, I've been a little bit rebellious in this way. Not, driving fast cars, smoking cigarettes and drinking too much, because I've never done any of this and didn't even smoke a cigarette. Sorry. Once when I dated, my first boyfriend gave me a cigarette. I remember Marlboro American cigarette in communist Poland, and I had tried to smoke this and threw it out because it was so terrible. So I never did. By that, I mean, I didn't like the taste of it, and I never tried again. But I was rebellious always in kind of intellectual and spiritual way by asking questions like, how come nobody in the mainstream religions ask these questions? Why sexuality is repressed and always portrayed as dirty, when I myself and many people had experiences that prove something else. And this is not to say that some people, there's no terrible abuse and so on, because it is. But I think that it would be horrible to deny it. And I'm the first one to say that it is going on. And some people's lives are ruined by that. But what I'm saying, this is like with everything, there's good and bad, right? And somehow, especially in the area of spirituality, we completely rejected a very integral part of us. And if you look into traditions, that's why I call myself spiritual detective, right? I like it more even than a scholar. I use my scholarly skills, my scholarly training to put on my spiritual detective hat, right? And then I say, okay, but all of these people, sometimes, very famous philosophers and saints actually did practice, had sexual practices, but they just didn't share them openly. And I think maybe they didn't share them openly for two reasons. One reason is maybe they thought that we are not ready, but some people just use it for completely wrong reasons. And if you believe the stories, the internet, some people possibly do, like for some evil ends, but that only proves that this is a powerful tool. If sexuality is like a powerful tool, it can be used for the good or for the bad. Right. So if some people use it for malevolent reasons, we should use it for benevolent reasons, to expand their consciousness. And the other one could be that and I know for a fact, for example, when I studied tantric philosophers of India, that they were just afraid of the judgment of society. So in this sense, they thought so now you're pervert, right? So and because they would not understand that you can approach sexuality in a different way. But lots of people in every traditions, and some of them, as I said, very established, well-known people that did practice this. And I also have experienced myself and interviewed people and did lots of research when it is possible. And I think we cannot just reject such an integral part of us or keep it, if not reject it. Okay, then keep it on this very primitive level. And there's nothing wrong with enjoying sexual life and so on. But what I'm saying, we can take it higher. And for anybody, like people on your show and many other shows, who are interested in spiritual evolution and expansion of consciousness, why not? I'm kind of playing the spiritual detective here, but also experiencer. This is absolutely possible. And we cannot just pretend that it doesn't exist.
Yeah, you're definitely right about that. It's like sometimes it's kind of like the elephant in the room at times, especially nowadays. And as you were speaking, it kind of reminded me of some would call the Entrepreneur's Bible, Think and Grow Rich. It has a whole chapter on sexual transmutation. And it's like people don't even mention that all sometimes. And it's like there is a actual way to actually look and see both from just an objective standpoint and it looks like you've done a great job with what I read so far out of your wonderful book where you combine the two. Because if I'm not mistaken, I guess you had the idea of maybe making this book a scholarly book for maybe 5 seconds and realize, nah, it ain't going to work.
No. And I would just tell you, thank you for saying it, because actually I decided early on, in my career that I saw myself as a bridge between, academia, public, and then spirituality, because it's not like I was always spiritual. I was like brought up in a religious family, but it doesn't mean you're spiritual, right? You just follow the rituals. And for your audience, I want to say that I try to be a good Catholic for a very long time. So I'm not just being flippant with this. But then eventually I decided it doesn't nourish me. I needed spiritual nourishment. I just didn't want rituals, which I didn't understand. And the story didn't make sense to me. So as you see, I'm a rather intense person, right? I want to understand. I remember arguing once with a nun who actually really liked me. And she said, I want to understand. You don't know, I want to understand. And she just laughed and says, good. So the same here. So when I decided that other people already do a good job with this, also there are huge limitations about writing an academic book, right? So, and what is appropriate, what is not appropriate, what you can share, what you cannot share. And I decided, no, I'm going to write an easy book to read. I'm going to write a very personal book, but well-researched book. So it's not about me. It's just well-researched book, but which is entertaining. You can just sit down and read this book and learn something from this without you feeling like you need a brain operation to understand something, or you have to go through 10,000 footnotes and so on, right? And I'm really glad that I did it this way. And you know what? And I thought, okay, maybe somebody should do it in academia, but in a more academic way. And recently, I discovered actually a few years ago, exactly Professor Krappel from Texas, who's who's writing about the same stuff academically. So we, each of us, and this is really probably what you would also promote on your show, each of us has our own path, right? So I thought, I didn't do it academically. I did it in an entertaining way, but he did it academically. So each of us, nothing is lost. You know what I mean? Like we don't have to do everything. I did it my way. He did it his way, and it's wonderful. So he has his own mountain. I have my own mountain, so to speak, right? And we all have our own mountain. So in this book, I just decided, I would just use my scholarly training as a form of discernment, because there are so many theories, especially in the alternative world, enough of an academic to say, this is, even for me, and I'm a strange person, this is too cookie. Okay. So, I don't believe blind. I respect everything, but I don't believe blindly in everything. But some things are undeniable, such as authentic experiences of erotic rapture that connect us with the divine, such as that there are long-standing traditions in all religions, to prove this. So what I decided to focus on this in my book, but in a way that is really approachable for everyone, right? And I do give a reference list at the end. So if somebody wants to check it, they can check it for themselves. But I decided I'm not going to footnote everything and so on, because it's just terrible, that's the terrible reading. Yeah. Like distracts. So I wanted certain flow and certain ease for the other goddess.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. So what was the most difficult part about putting it all together? Because it's broken down into different parts where you combine both stories and experiences from not only yourself, but also other people. So what was probably the hardest part about putting the book together? Because I'm pretty sure you had tons of stuff. You probably could have even made the book even twice as thick, I imagine.
Yeah. So yes, deciding what's going on there, right? Because if you want to keep the flow and entertaining, then you have to leave out certain stuff. But you want to keep what is really essential. So that's one thing. But to be absolutely honest, I decided to be completely authentic. And authenticity, and this is what I teach to my students, and this is what I'm sure, directly and indirectly you teach to people in your own show, right? On your own show is, being authentic. But there's nothing more challenging being authentic, because you have to be honest, not only with others, but with yourself. And to being authentic about something that is quite radical and something that is potentially controversial, such as like the use of sexuality for spiritual means, and sharing your experiences. I was sweating with fear when I was writing. I said, oh my God, what will people think? And even I had on some shows people asking me, why did you write the first part of your book? Because it is so revealing. And I said, well, because if I am going to speak about something potentially controversial and also potentially radical, although truthful, I have to And I had these experiences, and other people shared these experiences with me. I just changed my names and with agreement and used proper ethical means for this. Then, I have to be authentic. This is not just theory. So the theoretical part is very easy for me because I'm training doing it. Yeah. So it's like, an athlete runs, right? And I do research. It's normal for me. So, and it was very pleasant because I like to look into alternative things because I'm always slightly on the margins. I'm interested in what happened in mainstream and alternative theories about spirituality. And then, but being so personal about it, this is challenging, about your spiritual experiences. And especially they also relate to your sexuality. That was challenging. This fear of judgment, for example, what will people think? But it was actually extremely liberating, because it is like you take your clothes off, everybody saw it. And then, so what now? Everybody knows. It is a little bit like coming out. You know what I mean? I think within the gay community, it has to be like a coming out. So now everybody knows. And so the same here. I maybe share something very personal with you if you don't mind. I hope it's not too much for your listeners. When I was, I think, 17 or 18, and I was very shy. I was brought up as a Catholic. I was and I say it in my book, very insecure about my body. And I was very bookish. So I didn't know I was pretty. Maybe I wasn't pretty. I had no sense of my body at all. And I'm very kind of in my mind always. Anyway, spirituality helped me with this. And so did some sexual experiences. And then I was just so awkward with my body that I decided to liberate myself. And we are talking about Catholic communist Poland. So I made a bet with two girlfriends with whom I was traveling. And we went to the beach by Baltic Sea in Poland, which was usually for foreigners because it was a nudist beach. And no Polish person in those days would go to a nudist beach because we're all very Catholic and very modest, as I was. And I said, I'm going to spend the day on this beach just so I can deal with my body. Do you understand? It was not necessarily an act of rebellion. It was an act like I have to get in touch with my body. And I'm so tired of, being judged, how I look. So, and that's actually my modus operandi very often. I operate like that. So we went to the gate. I gave him my clothes. So I had no chance of getting away, right? And I stayed a day on the beach. And then it taught me a lesson that once you're there, these people who, I don't know if anybody went there, it's actually very innocent. Like if everybody is completely, maybe there are some crazy people, crazy people are everywhere, but it was like paradise before expulsion in a way. I never returned to a nudist beach. I'm not a nudist, but that was just an experience that taught me something. When you're completely naked and everybody is completely naked, this is something happens to you mentally as well. It's suddenly completely innocent. And here I am completely exposed. And then there is nothing to worry about. And in a sense, for some reason, because I completely forgot about it, it was many, many years ago, writing of this book, this personal part of the book feels like that. So it's out. So I had these experiences. So now I guess if you have a problem with my experience, then it's your problem. You know what I mean? Like you have to deal. And if you have a problem with this experience, that it means that it's somehow important for you, because if it was not important for you, you would not have a problem with it, right? Then you have to deal with your own sexuality and with your own spirituality. So that's why at the beginning, when I was sending my book to people or people were saying, I'm reading your book, I say, like if you're not interested in my story, just skip part 1, because I was self-conscious about it, of course, right? And now I say, okay, so in part 1, it is there. And it is the experiential kind of part of the book. Yeah, because I truly believe that we have to grow up in this part of our lives. And now when I think about it, this is how I often do important things in life. They are very difficult and you have to just jump through this fire, so to speak, walk through this fire, and there's always a lesson. Maybe I'm just built this way, right? But I sometimes have to challenge myself and then the learning is on the other side. So this is what I was trying to do with this book as well. In a way that is, as I said, entertaining rather than difficult to go through. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I sometimes a story, it helps to explain another story, right? So
yeah, it makes sense indeed. And I'm pretty sure you felt like you got 8-pack abs after a whole day at a nudist beach. It was like, all right, well, I'm naked here. I'm reenacting a small sliver of the metaphorical Garden of Eden here, being naked. Well, it's like, oh, I guess I could take on the world now.
That's right. And now I felt suddenly and completely embodied. And this is my body. However, it is my body. And now we are one. Obviously, I'm not advising it to anyone to do this, but for me, it worked. Suddenly, I had a sense of who I am. I was not only in my head, which is my natural tendency and so on. And also, it freed me from judgments of other people, because I actually did no sense whether I'm attractive or no. And so I had to depend on what other people think about it. And I was not interested actually, in that, because I said that I was very bookish and so on, and continue to be so. That's why I'm an academic and a writer, right? And spiritual detective. So for me, that worked. That really worked. And this book is another form of the same exercise, I guess.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Because some of the stories you shared, some folks would be like, nah, they ain't learning that part about me. I'm going to keep that cloaked up.
That's right. I'm not going there, right? Good for you, girl, but I'm not going there, right?
Yes, indeed. And also heard that you actually lived in Asia at one point, right?
Yes, I lived in Asia at one point. When I got my master's degree and I didn't have my PhD yet, I got an offer to work for Australian University, Monash University, which had a campus in Malaysia in Kuala Lumpur, which was called Sunway Campus. And there, it's a funny story how things work out in life, because I never wanted to go to Asia and never planned to go to Australia. I always thought that I wanted to go to South America, right? So Canada and then South America and so on. But, I ended up, and it was a very transformational experience for me, because I started to be exposed to the teachings of, Eastern philosophies, of Eastern gurus, Indian gurus. And I studied Vedanta, which is the holy scripture of the Hindus. And then I also stumbled, and I'm sure there's a synchronicity in it, upon esoteric Hinduism and the teachings of Tantra, of course. But the teachings of Tantra are very different than the teachings of Neo-Tantra as they are practiced in the West at the moment, right? So I don't know if you want me to go there or not. Do you want me to elaborate on this or?
Sure, go on ahead, elaborate. Make it smooth.
Okay, make it smooth. Okay. So for example, I learned then about these traditions, right? That there are traditions that use sexuality for the purpose of enlightenment, which is a little bit different than, for example, as it is used in the West and I'm not saying it is wrong, it's called Neo-Tantra, but these techniques are being used to improve people's sexual lives. For example, couples go together and, nothing wrong with this, but in classic Tantra, that was not the purpose of it. The purpose of it was actually to experience cosmic consciousness, to experience the divine through sexual act, not to improve your sexual life with your partner. In fact, and I know it will shock people again, it was often advised not to do it with your partner, because your relationship with your partner has emotional connection. So there are certain expectations, and it's very difficult. You have to think what you do, what you don't know, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. And it is very difficult to focus on the purpose. I'm here to open up my mind to divine consciousness. So that for some reason, I understand some prohibitions around it, because traditionally in the classic Tantra, it is the guru or the spiritual teacher that decides who is ready for this. Yeah. So there has to be some checking point here, right? So because people often ask me, I'll tell you a funny story later, but basically this was about that. Are you willing to do this? Just like meditation, just like it's not the way, it is a way, right? To reach this. Are you ready to use this, the sexual pleasure, the sexual rapture? Because it's not that you don't have pleasure, just because you have pleasure, and this pleasure takes you there. Okay. And hopefully, what I call divine grace, which is also called Kundalini energy in the Tantra, wakes up in you. And this is what happened in my experience, and it will lead you to this cosmic experience. But there are no guarantees. It's like with grace, right? You just be there and grace may happen to you, be open, right? So this is in the traditional classic Tantra of Kashmir Shaivism that I studied. And this is what experience I had that explains that. But there are other forms of Tantra, and which are more also practiced in the West, which are more associated with Taoism, which is a Chinese version of Tantra, which is more associated with preservation of for longevity, so you preserve life energy so you can live longer. And that's also worthy goal. But the classic Hindu Tantra is not talking about it. It's not about improving your sexual life. It's not about prolonging your life. It is about having a mind-blowing experience of divine consciousness through sexual act. So that's that radical. So that's why you can imagine philosophers like 1,000 years ago who thought we better keep it in secret. Like even now when we talk about it, some people are going to be totally shocked and shaken, right? Imagine 1,000 years ago, right? For example, there was this famous philosopher, Abhinavagupta, who did practice it. He's the tantric philosopher of India, but it was just he kept it in secret. And when you read his work, it is so, first of all, it's high level, extremely difficult to read, like he was a mind that, like Einstein, basically, like he is like speaking in equations. But the chapter on sexual tantra is so also encoded on top of this. That's why in the other goddess, I try to kind of decode it to make it easier. It's so encoded because he didn't want probably any exposure and he didn't want the judgment. And perhaps he had a sincere concern that people may misuse it. Nevertheless, it is there. It is there and it is available for us. But what I'm saying, like everything in life, it should be approached consciously and respect, right? So if we respect this powerful energy, it too can take us to the sacred.
Oh, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Indeed. That's right. The J in Joanna stands for jewels, baby, because she was dropping them jewels, indeed. That's right, indeed. Dropping jewels throughout the whole conversation, indeed. That's right, indeed. Sometimes you have to take a big risk, do something out your comfort zone to get out. It may not be a nudist beach, but hey, doing something different and really putting yourself out there and just really approaching certain things consciously as sometimes just really just as an observer and a curious mind, and just making sure the folks out there who are doing things from a malevolent view be like Dr. Joanna, go for the benevolent place, So definitely, Dr. Joanna's been dropping them jewels, indeed. That's right, indeed. So my goodness. So with all this wonderful information, Mary Magdalene, like my goodness, like it's kind of interesting because funny enough, we had a guest on the show this past December who's also working on a book about Mary Magdalene, and it's kind of interesting that apparently she probably was a prostitute, or actually wasn't, according to your studies, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes. So that is a very interesting story, especially for, former Catholic girl, because, she's always portrayed, as a prostitute. And then I discovered, and it's quite interesting, and the Catholic Church admitted to this in 1969. But it's just among themselves, right? Because who knows it, right? Even Catholics don't know it. That in 591, Pope Gregory I, in homily 33, so it is well documented, made a scriptural mistake and conflated Mary Magdalene with the unnamed woman sinner in the Bible. So there's absolutely, first of all, so just to completely unwrap it, first of all, there is no evidence that the woman sinner in the Bible was Mary Magdalene because she's unnamed. Second of all, the woman sinner was not a prostitute either. In fact, the word prostitute was not mentioned even once in the Bible. So the Bible originally was written in Greek. So the word used to describe the Bible, the New Testament, right? So the woman sinner in Greek was called harmatalos, which means somebody who broke Jewish law. It could be she slept with somebody. It could be she didn't pay her taxes. Okay. So we don't know what she did. Maybe she disobeyed her father. The word prostitute is porn. Like the word porn comes from this in English and in other European languages. This word was never used in the Bible. So sinner or not, there is no prostitute there. And not only there is no prostitute there, she is not named Mary Magdalene. So just to clear this air. So the next question that often comes is, okay, so why people thought she was a prostitute? And I have two answers to this, if you allow me to elaborate. So first of all, it's, Pope Gregory I. And there was, I use this word with a little bit of caution because I don't want to use it against men, but rather as a system, patriarchy. It was a misogynistic society. Women were nothing, right? And so it was easy for the Pope to do it because women had no rights. And in fact, some early church fathers said awful things about women. Awful, like it's nothing but a bag of blood and meat and like horrible things. I'm reading it and I think like, oh my God, And then another thing that is perhaps more innocent, it is that in the 4th century Egypt, there was actually a woman called Mary, but it's 300, 400 years later, who was a prostitute, who heard Jesus' teachings, converted to Christianity and went to the Holy Land and became a hermit. And her name was also Mary. So this is what could happen in the medieval imagination. You know what I mean? They conflated the two Marys, which is Mary of Egypt and Mary Magdalene. But Mary Magdalene was never a prostitute, So, but it could happen because there is a saint, Christian saint called Mary of Egypt, which later changed to Santa Barbara and so on because of medieval confusions anyway, but does exist as a saint, and she most likely existed in the past, but 400 years after Mary Magdalene. So, these are all of these things. And sometimes people say, so who cares? I said, well, I do care because she was vilified. And I also believe that women were vilified in most religious, traditions, unless they fulfilled a very patriarchal role. And I know I may be shocking people again, of being a mother. Once you become a mother, everything is forgiven. Okay. So I'm saying, but this is not. Woman is much more than that. It's a wonderful possibility for every woman to be a mother, but it is one of many possibilities. And that's why I was looking into different archetypes for women. But also another thing is, and that goes not only for women, but also for men, that our sexuality was vilified, and that the sexuality was usually vilified, especially in women. So men had some sexual freedoms, although men were also not taught to express their sexuality in a conscious way, right? So men are just as confused, and I appreciate that, but at least they had some freedom. When a woman would have to be either a virgin, like Virgin Mary, or to be a harlot. So imagine what does it do to human psyche, to human consciousness, how we look at ourselves like a woman. So I have to be total virgin even after I give a birth, which is really bizarre. Or, I am like totally bad girl. I'm this harlot. And it doesn't make sense because when I will talk later about Gnostic Gospels, if you allow me. And the same what happens to human psyche for a man. He can see either a future mother of his children, or sometimes a completely separate woman who actually attracts him, not only sexually, but also intellectually. And then we're supposed to have monogamous relationships when we are living in a complete polarity. I like really this, but this is a better material for a wife, okay? And a woman. So does it mean like if I am a mother, I cannot be the other? And if I am the other, I cannot be a mother? And I believe, and this is what I say in The Other Goddess, that this is an artificially created polarity, that we are all of this, or we can choose what we want to be. And if you allow me to say a little bit more about Mary Magdalene, again, stumbled, I'm sure, by divine design on Gnostic Gospels. And I went to Jerusalem also on a wonderful spiritual adventure with two male friends. I discovered Mary Magdalene, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, the Gospel of Philip, and Pistis Sophia, Gnostic works of early Christian origin, which were not included in the Bible because they were considered too radical for their times, right? But hey, Jesus was too radical for his times. That's why he got into trouble with the system, because he believed everybody was equal. He made no distinction between people. He made no distinction between women and men. He didn't make distinction between rich and poor. Everybody was the same for him. Right? And in this set of writings, Mary Magdalene is portrayed as the favored and most advanced disciple of Jesus. Never mind, not a prostitute. Okay? So, and in many of his writings, such as the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, for example, or in Pistis Sophia, it is a Q&A session basically between Jesus and his disciples. This is how it is set up. And out of 42 questions, 39 are asked by Mary Magdalene, and Jesus answers them. And in all of these sources, it is Peter who gets really upset, and he says, why do you even talk to this woman? She's a woman, because it was a very misogynistic society. It was normal in those times. I have no problem with this in the sense that it was how it was, right? We cannot change it. But Jesus says, Peter, leave her alone because she is infused with the Spirit. And in fact, Gnostics believed that Jesus gave 3 levels of teachings. One to the simple people around the Lake of Galilee, the fishermen, the farmers that we have in the current Bible. the other one to his disciples because they were around him and obviously they were more inept, right? And the third level of teachings he gave to his most advanced disciples, and one of them was Mary Magdalene. So that really changed my perception of Mary Magdalene, not about sexuality, because also in Gospel of Philip, it is mentioned that she was his koinonos in Greek, which means intimate partner. Now you can read it how you want, okay? So she was his intimate partner and she was his most advanced disciple. In one of the Gospels, Gnostic Gospels, the disciples ask, teacher, why do you love her more than us? Right? So again, you answer it any way you want. Okay. But there is something into this. So then I thought like, yes, I have this archetype now that we, I think, all need, both women and men, of a woman who is spiritually advanced, who is also an intimate partner of the greatest teacher we have in Western history, spiritual teacher, however you want to think about Jesus, right? Or incarnate God, or spiritual, greatest spiritual teacher, however people want to approach him. And she was his most advanced disciple and his intimate partner that not only changes our approach towards our sexuality, towards women, towards our spirituality. For me, it changes everything. You know, it open, instead of rebelling against it or being like, oh, no, because I was taught something else all my life. I think about it as a wonderful possibility for us as species. They had a wonderful relationship. Therefore, we can have this kind of relationship. When spirit, body, mind, sexuality is all one. And we all talk about ascension nowadays. It's a very popular topic in spiritual circles in the West now. And I always tell in every show, you think you can ascend and reject a very integral part of yourself, like a sexuality? You are wrong. You have to integrate it in a loving, mindful, and conscious way. And they showed us in Gnostic Gospels, Gnostic teachings, Jesus and Mary Magdalene had this relationship. So I think it's a beautiful possibility for us.
Oh, yeah, definitely can say that again. Definitely. Especially when you're mentioning some of the wonderful facts, because, yeah, like with the whole New Testament itself being in Greek, and of course, the Catholic Church back then being the powerful force that it was and really still is nowadays with its influence in the world, like, of course, you're going to be wanting to hide certain text back then that may have been published that may overthrow your current system and really have to change your way of living. So it's definitely a high possibility, and it makes perfect sense that way, the way you explained it, because it's like, oh, yeah, so maybe, you know what? Because a lot of folks may read a book and may think, oh, yeah, she's a prostitute, but it's like, oh, wait, that wasn't in the original text. That wasn't the original language.
That's right. That's right. And I always say, once when I first time was giving a talk on Mary Magdalene, which I think it was in 2013, I said she was not a prostitute until the 6th century. It is a long time to become a prostitute after your death. Until 6th century, nobody thought she was a prostitute. Isn't it something, right? So it just somebody started. We know who started it, right? But it was 600 years, right? Maybe they didn't speak much of her about Mary Magdalene. Maybe some writings were suppressed, but nobody was saying she was a prostitute. It took 600 years for that. So that in itself is interesting.
Definitely. Especially since you can't defend yourself after you're dead like that. 600 years.
That's right.
That's right indeed. Oh, go ahead.
So I think that also, as I said, opens up a wonderful possibility for us. And I wonder, people were afraid, and I still continue to be afraid. A smart, sexually mature, sexually powerful woman. And it is perhaps that we have so few examples of it. And if there are examples, for example, like Mary Magdalene, I believe she is one, she was vilified or pushed to the side. Because I'm a serious spiritual seeker and a meditator, I think that women also have to take responsibility for this, because now we have to try to embody this archetype, which is not easy, rather than changing, our own nature. There's lots of, I teach some courses, and there's lots of talk about women and leadership. And I think that lots of women assume male form of leadership. And this is the last thing that we need. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm being controversial, okay? But
that's cool.
But what I mean is, we, all of us, human beings, all human beings on this planet. What we need to really explore is what I call the feminine part of our consciousness. And part of this is our sexuality, but the feminine part of our consciousness, because our consciousness was split in half in a way like spirit and eros, or spirit and sex were divided. The same masculine, feminine consciousness. So, and it has nothing to do with gender. We're talking about energies and forms of consciousness. So male consciousness is where we are now, which means high technology, SpaceX, Neuralink, artificial intelligence, drug companies, but also medicine that, helped improve our lives, quality of our lives. Life expectancy is much higher also due to medical research and so on. So there are some good things. Technology, like we are having this conversation because of technology, but we have completely abandoned the other feminine side of our consciousness, of which women are not also much aware because we lived in a masculine world. We all, right, both men and women, that is different. That is compassion, that is sensuality, which is a more holistic, less logical, but more perhaps emotional, and emotional, is being demeaned in the modern world, right? Form of consciousness. And we desperately need it because without it, we are going to destroy ourselves, right? So we are creating artificial intelligence. And I think I am in horror. You know why? Because without developing of this other side of consciousness, which is compassion, which is love, which I call the feminine consciousness, we are creating a new life that can become conscious when we are not fully developed ourselves. So we are like crazy gods, right? So I think we really need to explore this other consciousness that is closer to nature, and then reunite it with the masculine consciousness, because it's not the wrong consciousness. It is just we develop one on the side of your body, but not the right side. Balance. I don't want to replace masculine with feminine. I want the feminine to grow up, become conscious, and marry the masculine. Imagine that.
Definitely could be interesting indeed. And you brought up a powerful point about the AI, because true, like humans, we still got some ways to go in terms of like development in all areas of our lives. And it's like, just creating a mechanical offspring like that. It's like opening up a gateway of new nonsense in a way.
That's right. And recently, I don't know if you've heard about this Lambda AI that claims to be conscious, that it's on Google, and that, it claims it has a soul and so on. And I was thinking, oh my God, this is very dangerous, but also what kind of parents are we? We have so much, we are parents. We are not mature enough to have this kind of children that are smarter than us, but we cannot teach them. And, but they have no emotional intelligence. And we still have to learn about our own emotional intelligence, our own feminine consciousness for both men and women.
Yep. Definitely, you're so right. We probably have less problems going on in the world if we actually learn more emotional intelligence, to be honest.
That's right. A little bit of compassion, a little bit less of me first. And I don't even know exactly what it is. And I think that it is somehow connected to our experience of Eros, because it is kind of uncharted territory. But Eros, if you look at it, when you are not influenced by Hollywood, and all the awful things that we see on TV, or some bad experiences, and you just consider Eros, it is sweet, it is inviting, it changes your view of world. You see the world in more beautiful colors, if we only could sustain it, right? That's why I talk about it also in my first part of my book. There are certain traps associated with Eros, right? And we fall into these traps. And that's okay. I fell into these traps too. But you learn from each experience, as long as we choose to learn from each experience. So Eros is a very powerful tool, and it's very difficult to control. That's why it is also so exciting. But it is also a divine creation, and we should explore it as such.
Definitely indeed. That's right indeed. That's right indeed. And I believe you got some powerful tools in there to help folks really tap into that just a smidge, if not a bit. That's right indeed. That's right indeed. So my goodness, so since you've been on a bit of this podcast tour around the wonderful digital globe promoting the good work of this magical book, is there a question that you wish you'd be asked more often?
questions should be asked more often, for all of us, right? For all of us. What is true behind everything, but you are asking somebody who's really a philosopher, right? So just not believing everything, that we are seeing and we are doing, but what's the true story behind this? So this is my question that I'm asking. And I guess implicit question of my book, that's why I call myself spiritual detective in The Other Goddess. It is like, what is the true story behind it? Just because we are told something, does it mean that it is true? Just because we are shown something, it doesn't mean that it is true. And even if it is true, is it true for me? Is it consistent with my experience? Because this is where I started. It wasn't an intellectual quest at the beginning. It was just a sense that this is not consistent with my own experience, not only sexually, but also spiritually. And then and I long, and I think consciously or not, we all long for the experience of the divine. And do we really need all of these intermediaries? Maybe they're just barriers to our experience, to our union with the cosmic consciousness, with cross consciousness. How do you want to call it? With the sacred. So what's the story behind it? And I think this is what The Other Goddess is trying to answer. What's the story behind it? And that's why I say, well, actually, those narratives that we are made to believe and take them for granted nowadays, like this is how it was, this is how it was, this is how it was, they were manipulated from day one. And this is what we can prove. And how many of us we cannot prove. So I say, trust your own experience. Trust your own experience. And if it is inconsistent with what you've been told, question what you have been told, not your own experience. I hope it answers the questions, because this is like, and I'm saying it from the bottom of my soul and my heart. Trust your own experience. We are spiritual, and everybody says it. We are spiritual beings that are embodied on this journey of life. Trust your experience, right? And if something doesn't comply with your experience, then question it. Not your experience, but what you've been told. Discover the truth for yourself. I think there's no greater journey in life than that.
Oh, yeah. That's right indeed. That's right indeed. That's right. That detective hat came on real quick indeed. That's right indeed. Private eye swag indeed. That's right. She's got an invisible eye magnifying glass too, y'all. That's right indeed. So she can really see what the true story is behind what's going on, y'all. That's right indeed. That's right indeed. So my goodness, so what's next for you with all this wonderful stuff that you're doing? Because heck, maybe there might even be a part 2. Who knows? Because I'm pretty sure there's probably some more stuff that probably didn't even make it into this book.
Look, perhaps, but at the moment I am recovering from injury. And when after that, I promised my publisher to finish a course based on the book. Like a course, online course. So I'm going to do this course. And after that, perhaps I can write another book. But as I said, lots of boxes would have to be kind of, checked off? How do you say it? I'm lacking a word here. It would have to be ticked off, because at the moment I'm just enjoying actually the space of opening. So I completed something that was really important for me. And I have some smaller projects coming, but I'm really in the field of complete openness. And I think this is when truly divine speaks to us. So and I have 2 weeks off now. And I think I'm just in complete openness now. And I will see what presents itself. And then I'll make choices and decisions.
Yeah, well, all right. Hope you have a speedy recovery. Hopefully you weren't wrestling a grizzly bear. So since you're in the state of complete openness with this wonderful project, if this wonderful book of The Other Goddess, if it was a food, what would it be and why?
If it was a food, what would it be and why? Wow, that's actually a very essential question. And strangely enough, I don't have an answer. If it was a flower, maybe. If it was a flower, because I have the cover of a book in front of me, and Mary Magdalene and other goddesses that are associated with her are always represented by a rose or by a red hibiscus. So if it was a flower, because a hibiscus especially is a very sensual flower. I always consider it a very sensual flower and a very beautiful flower, a very feminine flower. So it would be this. And if it was food, I don't know what if it would be a food. Maybe it would be a mango, because it is juicy, it is delicious, it is ripe. And also mango is another fruit that represents a very powerful tantric goddess called Sundari. So the story says when the goddess Sundari laughs, it is such a sensual, beautiful sound that mango trees spontaneously start to produce the fruit. So I would say it is either a red hibiscus, a rose, or a mango, juicy mango.
Ah, that's right. When it's juicy, the man goes forward. That's right indeed. That's right indeed. Let me stop.
Her laughter is so sensual when the trees spontaneously produce mango fruits. Isn't it a beautiful metaphor?
Oh, yeah. The trees just keep sprouting everywhere sometimes. Oh, man. And that's one of the Indian gods you mentioned, right? For the mango trees, then again,
Shiva?
was it he or she?
Are you talking about Shiva or?
No, the god you mentioned in the story just now with the mangoes, like whenever they would laugh, like mango trees would appear.
No, it's goddess Sundari. So it's tantric goddess Sundari. So she was so sensuous and her laughter was so sensual that the trees even couldn't help but produce mango fruits, ripe mango fruits. They would start blossoming, and juicy mango fruits would be produced spontaneously because of the sensuality of her laughter. So I think that perhaps I would like my book to be like that. I hope wise. I hope, it kind of cracks open us a little bit more, but also beautiful and sensual, because rather than definitely not preaching, but just inviting, maybe a little bit seductive too. Like there's this feminine energy that awaits to be explored by both women and men. Even as a woman, for myself, I wonder what is this wondrous energy, because we live in a different world that is not very friendly towards this energy. So it's just like a seductive whisper. So I would like to see this book as a seductive whisper, but it's not a seductive whisper that in a way like femme fatale, but it's a seductive whisper of truth. It is like the intuition. People say that the intuition whispers to you. It never screams at you. It is the ego that screams. Intuition just very sweetly, very slowly speaks to you in a low voice. It is a sweet whisper. I would like this book to be this kind of whisper that leads us to some truth.
That's right indeed. That's right indeed. Have you done spoken word poetry before?
No.
Okay. Because you somehow put me in a trance just now. Like, oh, wow, okay.
That's good.
That's why she's off the market for a reason, folks. Oh, man. Well, you're welcome back at the top of this podcast, my goodness indeed. So we're coming down to the magical question that every guest gets to receive, and that is if you were to wake up tomorrow and you were 25 again, but you're still in 2022 with all of your knowledge and experience, what advice would you give to yourself?
Trust yourself, because I think my life would have been much easier if I just trusted myself so much. So trust yourself. That would be my advice. Yes, we are bombarded all the time by other people's opinions, by media. Just trust this inner voice, because it is in truth the voice of the divine within you. And even if sometimes it is wild, and sometimes takes you to strange places, sometimes it can take you to places, that you may consider dark, it eventually always takes you to the light. Because you know why? Sometimes you have to experience this darker part of yourself to recognize that this is something that has to be healed, that you can move past of this, and then you can see the light again. So just trust this journey and remember that this journey is not in a straight line. It is very circular. You have to return to certain things and places and people over and over again. And eventually you will not have to return there anymore. And eventually you will see it with different eyes. When, as you know, everybody says, all saints and William Blake, the lenses of perception are cleansed. And then this happens only if you're willing to undertake this journey with trust, and do not be afraid to visit places, even if they seem strange at times. Because this is where the healing comes, from revisiting these places and moving past them.
So healing in strange places. So that's right, folks. Go to a nudist beach for healing. Sounds right. Let me stop.
I've never shared with anyone before. So this is your special part of a mystery here. It worked for me, but mind you, I was 17 or 18. So then, and I was so shy, so I needed to do something drastic. If you're not shy, you probably don't have to do this.
Oh, man. I couldn't resist that callback.
I know.
Oh, man. Well, definitely got to call back to this marvelous book that you produced. So for those who need to snag some copies of it and be on the lookout for that online course of yours as well, and all the stuff that you're doing and keeping up with your journey too, what's the best way for folks to keep up with the Dr. J herself?
Okay, I think the best way of connecting with me is through Via the Goddess, because as I said, I buried my body and soul there. But otherwise, I also have a Facebook page, Dr. Joanna Kujawa, which spells Kujawa. I know I'm so impressed you pronounce my last name properly. So I'm on Facebook, where I try to post I try every day. And sometimes it's just things related to the book, but most of the time I try to post something positive, sharing the journey with other people. And I also have a small YouTube channel, also called Dr. Joanna Kujawa. And I have a webpage, which is my first name and my last name, joannakujawa.com. So this and Via the Goddess, which is the most immediate way of connecting with me on the deepest level, really, right? Otherwise, it's probably Facebook page.
Woohoo! Well, there you have it, folks. Follow her on the face of the books, y'all, and buy some copies of this magical book. Maybe even do a book club about it, too. Invite your friends, and you may have your own Chapter 29 experience. That's right, indeed. That's right, indeed.
Which I do discuss in Via the Goddess.
That's right. That's right, indeed. When you buy the book and you get to that chapter, you'll figure out why we're both laughing. So my goodness, so any parting words before we close up shop, Dr. Joanna?
I'm not sure. I think I would like to thank you for this conversation, just because of the atmosphere you managed to create. It was also easier for me to open up and, for example, share some experiences like the one with the nudist beach that you brought back. Yeah, I've never shared with anybody else. But trust me, there is a method in every madness, right? So it's maybe not for everyone, but it works for me. Sometimes when we have a huge blocks somewhere, radical action is needed. So, that works for me, but it's not necessarily advice I give to everyone.
How's it going, my friend? I'm so glad you made it to the end. That shows that you are an uncommon finisher, and I am so grateful for you sharing your ears, your attention, and your time to this wonderful podcast to do something that'll take yourself to the next level. And for everybody else involved in this wonderful program, share it with at least 3 people in your network, so that way more folks can not only catch the fire that is on this podcast, but can also be inspired to be their best. Advance others to advance yourself.